Can nightmares kill you? In the 1970s, a 15-year-old boy who had fled Cambodia to come to America started having terrifying nightmares of something chasing him. So bad that he would stay awake for days. Then one night, his parents heard him cry out in the middle of the night and ran to go check on him. But he was dead. But then the same exact thing happened in the 80s to 130 other immigrant men. These deaths were referred to as nightmare deaths and even inspired the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. Some people hypothesized that maybe all of the men had something wrong with their hearts. Or maybe it was the stress of immigrating from a war-torn area. But the one thing they all had in common was that they all cried out in their sleep before it happened. The deaths eventually tapered off, but to this day, no one knows what caused them. This is the story of the girl who was kidnapped twice by the same man. Jan Broberg was just 12 years old the first time she was taken by her neighbor. His name was Robert Berchtold, and he was an expert manipulator. Leading up to the kidnapping, he had convinced her parents that she needed to sleep in the same bed as him for therapy. He had even convinced both her mother and her father to sleep with him. One day in 1974, Berchtold picked up Jan to take her horseback riding, but instead he took her to Mexico. While they were there, he convinced her that she was an alien and needed to conceive his child in order to save the human race. And because she was a child, she believed him. The abuse carried on until Jan was 16 and realized that he had been lying to her this entire time. But now she's telling her story because she's an executive producer on the Peacock show A Friend of the Family. Not only do I love this because the story will be told in a way that's approved by Jan, but it also means that she gets to profit from the show in a way that most true crime survivors don't get to. Let me know if you plan on watching. Nothing could have prepared me for the end of this story. So when I was little, I used to always complain about a scratching noise coming from the room next to me. My dad actually converted the guest bedroom next to my room into a home office, and I was never allowed in there. He was a really busy man. One night, I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I thought I heard a small sob come from his office. I could faintly make out the sound of a woman crying, but I knew I wasn't allowed to go in there. And honestly, at that point, I was kind of too afraid to anyways. The next day, I told my dad what I had heard, and he told me it was probably just a bad dream. But that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had heard. My dad spent the entire day in his office that day. I didn't see him come out once. The next night, I waited until my father was asleep, and I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I went into his office. And when I opened the door, there were no books. There was no desk. There wasn't even a single chair. Just scratched into the walls a million times. Help me. Another day, another Zillow nightmare. But surely this one can't be that bad. Look at all this yard space you have, and look at that nice wraparound porch. Let's look at the listing. I mean, first and foremost, it has a pending offer, so it must be good enough for someone. This home could be brought back to like new condition with complete mitigation of mold and mildew. Needs walls, ceilings, and flooring, I mean, what other parts of the house are there, removed and replaced. Okay, let's take a look. Oh, they weren't kidding. Look at the mold on all of the walls. I mean, I like that they included the box of the TV, like, look, a TV could go here. Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, this is in Montana, so I imagine it's what happens when you abandon a home in a place with seasons. How did they take pictures of this? Like, the person taking pictures must have been in a full hazmat suit. I mean, listen, if you wanted to buy a house just to burn it down, $20,000 is not that steep. I'm guessing they didn't teach you about the Russian survival experiment in school. So during the height of the Cold War, Russian operatives wanted to see if they could train their citizens to survive a nuclear apocalypse. So to do this, they recruited 12 adults, all ages 18 to 45, and ran them through a simulation. They told all 12 people they were being recruited off-site for a routine psychological exam, basically studying the effect of the Cold War on mental health. But the second day everyone was there, the operatives told everyone that a nuclear bomb had gone off and killed everyone in a 1,200-kilometer radius. They then kept the subjects in a bunker for 5 days with limited access to food and water. They even showed the subjects fake images of the blast and told them that their friends and family didn't make it. So then on the 5th day, they were let out into what looked like a nuclear wasteland and left to their own devices. Here's where I should mention that at the time, Russian operatives were actually terrified of the effect that radiation would have on local wildlife. And that's where this guy comes in, a creature that they were doing prior experiments on and unleashed on the 12 subjects. I want to keep these short, so I'm going to do the rest in another part. This is the Russian survival experiment. During the Cold War, Russian operatives wanted to see if their citizens could survive a nuclear fallout, but the one thing they couldn't account for was how radiation was going to affect local wildlife population. So in secret, they were testing radiation on animals and breeding these wild, hyper-violent creatures. Then they recruit a group of 12 adults and keep them in a bunker for 5 days, lying to them and saying that a bomb went off and all of their friends and family didn't make it. And then on day 5, they released them back into the woods along with all of the animals that they had been manipulating. This is actually one of the only photos ever collected from the trial, and it's believed that this is actually one of the animals they were working on in secret. The only thing we know is that one of these subjects was killed by one of these creatures almost immediately, which caused the other 11 to scatter in the woods and try and survive for the next few weeks. 11 skeletal remains were eventually found, all of them torn apart, and many of them missing their left hand. But a 12th skeleton was never found, leading many to believe that someone is still out there who knows exactly what went on. There's something scary about this photo. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. So this is a bunch of linen workers in Ireland around the year 1900. And everything looks normal until you realize that there's a hand not attached to a person crawling over the shoulder of this woman. Let me know in the comments if you saw it right away. So more and more sightings of the Smiling Man have been reported recently. For those who don't know, the Smiling Man is a very tall, odd-looking man who wears this creepy grin and is often caught trying to steal children, as was the case with a young girl named Linda. Years ago, Linda lived in West Virginia, and one night she awoke to strange sounds in her bedroom. She rolled over to go back to sleep, but what she saw in her hallway was a tall, dark, shadowy figure. Linda closed her eyes in fear, and when she reopened them, he was standing right above her. She screamed and he disappeared, but recently there's been more reports of sightings. Legend has it, if you close your eyes at night and think the words Smiling Man, Smiling Man, Smiling Man over and over again, he'll appear. Would you try? The story of Jean Dulac and his evil doll. So in the early 1900s, Jean Dulac was one of the most famous ventriloquists in all of vaudeville. His doll not only looked like it was speaking on its own, but it appeared to move on its own and also had a voice completely different from Jean's. This confused a lot of his fans, but they mostly chalked it up to his talent. But others felt there was something slightly sinister about the doll. Reports that the doll was sometimes caught speaking even when it wasn't on Jean's hand. Missy Waters, a vaudevillian dancer and Jean's lover, claimed that one night she walked into Jean's room to find the doll off of his hand and Jean on the other side of the room curled up in a ball crying. She said a voice was coming from the doll speaking Latin, and it clearly was not Jean. The more Jean used the doll, the sicker he got too, and within a few years of his success, he was on his deathbed. And apparently, right before he died, he asked to make a call to Missy. According to her, on that phone call, Jean said it was the devil inside of the doll. He said that he had bought the doll off a man traveling through town with the understanding that if he let the devil live inside the doll, he would have all the fame and fortune he desired. His last words were, "Do not let anyone have this doll after I die." The whereabouts of the doll are currently unknown. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a sketch, then I'm going to show you the person that was arrested, and we're going to see. So this is the police sketch for the man wanted in the Delphi murder case, one of the most high-profile unsolved murders right now. For those who don't know, in 2017, 2 young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German, were murdered while out for a walk in the woods. And a few days ago, this man, Richard M. Allen, was arrested as a suspect in the murders. And Richard looks so different from that sketch that here's actually a photo of him posing next to it, completely unnoticed. A better comparison would actually be this photo that one of the girls posted to Snapchat, where she was able to get video and audio of the man before they were murdered. Details pertaining to the arrest are still under wraps, but I could definitely see how that man would be this man, more so than the police sketch. This is the dark side of trick-or-treating. Multiple sightings of this clown were reported in Denver on Halloween night, and many of the reports claim that this person was handing out candy in different neighborhoods. Now, most adults didn't let their kids get anywhere near the clown, but a few unsupervised children grabbed candy from him. Candy that was collected as evidence showed disturbing images and satanic verses on the wrappers. A few of the children that ate the candy were actually monitored in a hospital overnight and deemed okay by doctors, but a few of them have now reported an inability to sleep. And one 10-year-old boy has reported an overwhelming desire to go find this clown, who he told his parents lives in the woods behind the school. Police are now looking for any other information the Denver community might have on this person. I keep seeing a lot of online discourse about the new Netflix Jeffrey Dahmer show and if it's actually exploitative, so let's take a little deeper look. Recently, it came out that one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims' siblings learned that the show was coming out when everyone else did. Her name's Rita Isbell, and her brother was Errol Lindsay, and they use her likeness and name in the show pretty explicitly. Rita was known pretty publicly at the time for her outburst during the Jeffrey Dahmer trial, and you can see here, the show makes no bones about using her exact likeness and outburst to profit, and Rita is not partaking in any of the profit shares of this show. Personally, and this is just me, I also think the show makes a very specific choice by casting Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer. Evan has a really specific online fan base of young girls who idolize the psychotic characters he plays. So it's not shocking to me that people are watching this show and tweeting insanities like this. The show is #1 on Netflix right now, meaning it's one of the most watched shows in the whole world. So I can't imagine being a victim's family member because it's everywhere. And though both Evan Peters and the show's creator Ryan Murphy have come out and said that they didn't want the show to be about Jeffrey Dahmer, they wanted it to be about the victims, there's not really a lot being done right now for the victims or their families. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments if you've seen it. If you thought Blonde did Marilyn wrong, wait till you hear this. Did you know that a man bought the crypt above Marilyn Monroe so that he could be buried face down on top of her? I cover a lot of dark and true crime stories on this page, and this is one of the worst I've ever heard. His name is Richard Poncher, and he bought the space above Marilyn from her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio. Apparently, after he died, his wife told the funeral director that his dying wish was to be placed in a certain position with Marilyn, and they did it. Never mind that Hugh Hefner also bought the spot next to Marilyn Monroe, even though he had never met her. He started Playboy when he used her naked pictures without her consent and launched the magazine into stardom. There's a lot of people right now saying, let Marilyn rest, let her rest, leave her life alone. Well, the truth of the matter is she can't. Because for the rest of eternity, she's surrounded by predatory men that she did not ask to be placed anywhere near. If you've ever seen this man, you may be cursed. So around 2009, a man by the name of Jacob Fairchild was doing a human experiment in an old insane asylum. The experiment was to see if the subjects could stay awake for an entire month playing a computer game that he designed. But the people that were doing this experiment were not heard from afterwards. Jacob was apparently losing his mind while conducting this experiment. He started wearing a mask covered in eyes, calling himself the Timekeeper. This is an image that a former staff member had drawn of him. Eventually, legend has it, he went so crazy he locked everyone inside the facility and burned it down, killing everyone, including himself. But as the place was burning down, he threw himself over a computer server that had the game on it, and it was the only thing not damaged by the fire. Recently, it's been reported that the game Jacob created has been randomly resurfacing on people's computers. To this day, 2 of the teens that reported playing the game have died, 3 have gone missing, and 1 reported seeing this person upon starting the game. And no one who has ever played the game has won. This was the last photo ever taken on Chelsea McPherson's camera before she went missing. So just outside of Seattle in 2004, high school junior Chelsea McPherson's teachers noticed something was wrong with her. For one, it appeared like she just entirely stopped sleeping. She apparently mentioned to a friend that every time she fell asleep, she said that she saw the image of a clown that she referred to as Mr. Bubbles. Her English teacher also reported that she was constantly looking outside of the classroom window as if something was out there watching her. Police evidence gathered after her disappearance showed that her notebooks were full of sketches like this with what police now believe to be Mr. Bubbles. October 4th, 2004 was the last night anyone saw Chelsea. The last text sent from her phone was to her friend saying, "I'm tired of being afraid." And now, this carnival act became a killer. This is the tragedy of Lobster Boy. So Grady Stiles was born with a deformity that made his hands and feet look like lobster claws. It's called ectrodactyly, and you can see he doesn't have middle fingers. This was actually really common in his family. So common they actually opened up their own circus. But outside of the circus act, Grady was incredibly violent towards his family. So much so that there's actually a story of during a fight with his wife, he was able to somehow pull out her IUD. I hate that I read that. So in 1978, his daughter Donna starts dating this guy Jack, and that's when things turned deadly. The night before they were to be married, Jack went to see Grady in hopes of getting his approval of their marriage. But Grady met Jack with a shotgun and took his life. The prisons at the time actually weren't able to accommodate disabled people, so he just got 15 years of probation. And his reign of terror actually continued until his wife put a hit out on him and hired their 17-year-old neighbor to do it. And Grady was killed after serving no time for any of his crimes, and his wife got 12 years in jail and the neighbor got 27. A 5,000-year-old Spanish Stonehenge has just emerged, and it's all thanks to climate change. So Spain is having a terrible drought right now, and part of the Valdecañas reservoir has dried up. And in the area that has dried up, this stone structure has been found. It's officially known as the Dolmen of Guadaparal, and very little is known about who constructed it or why. Many archaeologists believe that it's a tomb due to the fact that remains have been found nearby. They also believe that the rocks that are standing upright probably had other rocks on top of them, kind of making a table shape. Dolmens are actually pretty common, but we still have really no idea what they were for. Some have evidence that they were tombs, while others just contain animal bones and pottery. So I'm very curious to see what else is found at this site. So there's actually talk now that artificial intelligence is going to get so good it will be able to design the most beautiful people on the planet. I've been using artificial intelligence for a while now, so I wanted to see if I could get it to design one of these people so you guys could see what I was talking about. I fed the bot key physical features that we typically associate with supermodels, and this is what it drew me. Bella Hadid, I think you're safe for now. But then I thought maybe my search terms were wrong, so I tried to type in something that was a little more clear for the bot, and yeah, not much better. I thought maybe it would do a better job with men or different skin tones. I think eventually these bots are going to get really good, but for right now, I think supermodels are safe. This photo is of the Cincinnati crawler. It was taken by a family who caught him in their home in 1974, but he escaped shortly afterwards. So in 1974, the Johnson family in Cincinnati noticed a couple weird things happening in their home. The 14-year-old daughter, Claire, would complain about seeing glowing eyes outside of her window at night. And then one night, the youngest son, Timmy, was laying in bed in the dark when he felt the family dog jump up onto his bed. But when he went to go pet it, it was not the dog. It was the crawler, who police still believe was responsible for the disappearance of 4 other boys in the area. Some believe that he was an escaped convict, while others actually believe that he was the victim of human experiments happening in the area that may have been conducted by the family's dad. Claire snapped this photo of him before he escaped, but he was never found since. More human remains were found in the rapidly drying Lake Mead, and investigators are worrying that time is running out on finding any clues. Of the 3 sets of remains found, the one that looks the most like foul play was the one found in this barrel. If you don't remember, in May, investigators found a body inside of this barrel, maybe from the late 70s or early 80s, and we know that there was a gunshot wound. And these remains are being found as Lake Mead has been rapidly drying over the last few decades. What's really interesting though is because Lake Mead used to be so deep, the bottom was so cold that bodies wouldn't decompose there. Or at least would decompose very slowly, and so 2 of the bodies still have organ tissue on them. But investigators are worried because for a person that was thrown in the lake in the late 70s, witnesses to that event are getting very old. And that's also when in Vegas, which is right next to Lake Mead, the mob had a total stronghold on the area. So a lot of witnesses might just not want to talk. It seems like it's a race against the clock to find any answers on this, but hopefully we start learning something soon. This is the time I was almost abducted by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I went to go visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a pretty hard thing for me to process as he only died in March of 2011, so it was all still pretty new to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave crying and thinking to myself, when all of a sudden I looked up and see a man running at me full speed from the woods in front of me. I was able to get myself to my truck pretty quickly before he got to me, but by the time I got in the truck, he was only about 50 feet away. I got in my car before he could get to me and locked the doors, much to his displeasure. He threw his hands up as if he had lost a football game. I started my truck and started driving out as fast as I could, but not before I passed him. I didn't break eye contact with him the entire time I was driving past, so I got a really good look at him. So cut to a few years later, I'm pretty bored at work, so I download this random app that has a bunch of paranormal, UFO, cryptid, and serial killer stories on it. And as I'm browsing through stories, I come across one that makes my heart absolutely drop. There was a photo of a man I recognized very well, Israel Keys, who was most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and throwing the pieces of her body in a lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. He had been killing for a few years, to the point where no one really knew what his actual death toll was, and he would eventually go on to take his own life in prison. At the end of this book I read about him, they mentioned his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if he left any kill kits in that cemetery. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm gonna show you a couple police sketches, and then we're gonna see what the people looked like when they were actually caught. And I cover all sorts of true crime and spooky stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. Starting with this one. So this was a man who SA'd a minor, and this was the description that she gave to the police. And as you can see, this is really close. He has the big glasses that go up over his eyebrows, broad nose, really round face. Even the hairline is pretty similar. This is a woman who stole a baby from a maternity ward. And she was actually caught 10 hours after the sketch was released because she looks almost identical to it. So the witness who gave the description to the police officer for this one was actually intoxicated when he saw her. But that person basically got it identically correct. You can see her wispy bangs, super round face, the way that her hair comes down over the sides of her face, even her eyebrow shape is perfect. These sketches were all done by a woman named Lois Gibson, who holds the Guinness World Record for most successful police sketch artist. She helped solve over 1,000 crimes in her 30-year career. This is one of the worst experiments ever conducted in the United States on people. It's the Tuskegee experiment. In 1932, 600 black men were recruited for a study in Alabama by being promised free medical care. 399 of these men were suffering from syphilis, a common STI, and the study promised medical care for the rest of their lives. But that's not what happened. Secretly, the study was designed to track the full progression of the infection, meaning that the subjects were not given real medicine. Instead, they were given aspirin and mineral substances. The progression of syphilis is terrible, and many men in the study went blind and insane. Meanwhile, researchers were watching this happen and did not intervene. Probably the worst part of this entire study was that in 1943, while the study was going on, penicillin became the most common cure of syphilis, but because it would have interrupted the study, none of the men were given it. The study was shut down in 1972, but at that point, many men had already lost their lives. President Bill Clinton formally apologized for the study in 1997, but for many, it was too little too late. There's been an uptick in siren head sightings recently. Things are about to get bad. So this past week, just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, 2 girls were walking through the woods when they heard what sounded like an emergency siren. They were terrified and started running, but then they heard what they told police sounded like their names coming through a speaker system. Now, from other siren head sightings in the past, we know that he uses the siren to lure people out of their homes, and that by the time you hear your name, it's too late. The girls made it out of the woods, but not before one turned around to snap this photo. Siren Head hasn't been seen in over 20 years, but it looks like he may be back. What's worse is that other teens in the area have complained about hearing their names being read through a speaker in the middle of the night, waking them up. And what we know from experience is by the time one person sees him, he is deep inside the community. This is why babysitting always freaks me out. So in 2014, Sarah DeWalt was babysitting for a new family that had just moved into her neighborhood in Ohio. The family consisted of 2 young children under 10, but when Sarah showed up that night, the parents kept talking as if they had 3 children. There were 3 sets of pajamas laid out, there were 3 bowls of ice cream on the counter, but the family clearly only had the 2 kids. So that night, Sarah and the kids are winding down watching a movie when all of a sudden Sarah starts hearing noises in the house. There were footsteps shuffling like someone else was there, and she had this overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. So she gets up to check on the noise, but then the kids turn to her and say, "Oh, that's Bonnie, don't bother her." Sarah leaves it because she's freaked out, but then later that night she goes to check the nanny cam and she sees this image captured in the hallway. She stayed up until the parents came home, but she never went back after that. If you've seen this man in your dreams, I have some bad news. So this is Hatman, and he is one of the most commonly seen sleep paralysis demons in the entire world. And here's how you know if you're about to see him. First, you'll wake up in the middle of the night and you won't be able to move at all. Like you'll feel completely paralyzed. Next, you'll feel a crushing feeling on your chest like something is sitting on it. And when this happens, it's going to be very hard to breathe. And at that point, there's nothing you can do. That's when Hatman comes into your room. Many doctors believe that Hatman is just a fragment of people's imaginations, but a lot of people think that he's shown up in photos like this one, or this eerie one that was taken on the day of these women's mother's funeral. In the next part, I'm going to read some stories of people who believe they've seen him. If you see him while you're awake, run. So this story actually comes from a Reddit user who's a therapist, and this user had a patient who was coming in complaining of seeing Hatman at night. This patient would apparently wake up in the middle of the night to see Hatman standing at the foot of their bed, watching them sleep. And as a result, they were not really sleeping much. So the therapist prescribed some pretty heavy sleeping medication, and as a result, the patient starts getting a little better. But then one day, the patient comes in and just looks like they had seen a ghost. So the therapist asked them what was wrong, and they said that as they were getting in the car to come to therapy, they saw Hatman standing across the street during the day. This therapist had only ever heard of Hatman when it came to patients waking up in the middle of the night and seeing him, never when they were already awake doing things in the middle of the day. So the patient is terrified, but the therapist thinks this might be a side effect of the medication. It takes a little while to get used to. But that was the last time the patient ever came to see the therapist. This place was built just to live out the dark fantasies of its creator on some unsuspecting guests. It's H.H. Holmes's Hotel of Horrors. So Holmes moved to Chicago in the late 1800s so that he could open a hotel for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Apparently he was a hit amongst the ladies, even though I don't see it, but I guess it was slim pickings amongst those that didn't die of tuberculosis in their youth. And this hotel was full of nefarious instruments. Down in the basement there was an incinerator that was person-sized. He had a chute that went from a windowless room all the way down to the basement. There were rooms that were either completely sealed or had too many doors in order to confuse guests. Guests would often complain about their doors being jiggled at night as if someone was trying to get in their room. And as the hotel was being built, workers would constantly complain about H.H. Holmes' weird behavior. There were reports that he would ask people working on the hotel if they were willing to kill another worker for him, and if they said no, he would fire them. And this, children, is why we need unions. Not to mention a shocking number of women were disappearing from the hotel. So this is the part of the video where you get to guess what he was doing in there, and we're gonna say it together on the count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, skeleton harvesting. That's right, he was harvesting skeletons to sell to a local medical school. This only lasted for 2 years until he was found and convicted of murder, but some reports say he killed up to 200 people in there, mostly women. Some people also believe that he was Jack the Ripper, but that is for another video. Anyways, we're gonna talk about more scary homes later. Bye! Okay, so someone sent me this Zillow nightmare and I am so excited to share it with everyone. Before we get into the listing, I would like to draw everyone's attention to the sticker price, and that is $250,000. But let's look at what they have to say. Calling all investors, red flag. Cash hard money offers only, $250,000. And that gets paired nicely with do not enter, all caps, 3 exclamation points, cannot be safely shown. Let's take a look. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. Kaylin, that looks like a shed. Yes, but maybe it's gonna wow us with the interior. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't do that either. Some of these pictures are confusing because it's like, what am I learning about the space in this photo? Am I learning that the world's largest spider lives in here? And the same goes for this one. This is just trash on the floor. The housing market in LA right now is just so dire. And the most laughable part of all of this is that on the website, it says we estimate this home will sell faster than 99% of the nearby homes. But this is easily going to take tens of thousands of dollars to repair on top of buying it. What I'm about to show you is the photo Katrina Whalen captured on her Ring camera the other night. So Katrina lives alone down a long country road in West Texas. And 3 nights ago, she invited a friend over for dinner at 7 p.m. But 7 rolls around and her friend's not there. And then 8 rolls around and her friend is still not there. And that's when Katrina starts to hear footsteps outside. Slow at first, but then it starts to sound like someone is running full speed at her house. Thinking it's her friend, she goes to open the door, but no one is there. So Katrina calls her friend, but then when the other line picks up, it's just heavy breathing. And then laughing. She's really freaked out now, so she runs upstairs, but that's when she gets the notification that someone is at her front door. And this was that someone. Katrina is still alive to tell the tale, but there's been an uptick in Reddit users complaining in West Texas of hearing someone outside and then answering the door to see no one is there. Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? I'm going to be showing you photos from inside a place with a very dark past, and we're gonna see. This is a series, so make sure you're following along and remember this room. Some of you true crimers might recognize this place already, but this is the home of JonBenét Ramsey. JonBenét was just 6 years old when her body was found in the wine cellar of this house, which was this room. If something felt off when you were looking at this photo earlier, you were onto something. We're still not entirely sure what happened the night of JonBenét's death, but many people seem to think that the parents had something to do with it. And part of the reason is this green staircase right here. This is the staircase where an incredibly bizarre ransom note was found. This note was found on Mrs. Ramsey's stationery and was 3 pages long, meaning the killer was in the house for a while before getting JonBenét. And that's normally not the case with these kinds of crimes. People have also noticed that $118,000 is a very strange amount for a ransom. The Ramsey parents were actually cleared of the crime in 2008. And this home is now owned by a couple who, to no one's surprise, has completely remodeled it. I don't personally think that I could live inside this home, but let me know in the comments if you feel like you could. You've heard of Charles Manson, but I bet you haven't heard of Tony Costa. In 1968, young women were disappearing from Cape Cod, and Tony Costa seemed to be at the center of it. See, in his daily life, Tony Costa was a charming man. But Tony had another side of himself that he referred to as Corey. And Corey had a thirst for blood. He would lure his victims into this graveyard where he would promise them drugs, but instead would take their lives and dismember them. And since it was the 1960s and there were so many transient teens coming in and out of Cape Cod, it took police officers months to take any of these disappearances seriously. We know about his victims Patricia Walsh, Marian Wysocki, Susan Perry, and Sidney Monson, but there's potentially 4 others. And you can read all about Tony Costa in Helltown, Casey Sherman's new book. It's a great end of summer read, really putting you at the heart of coastal New England during the hippie movement, including all the love, drugs, and murder that took place. This story keeps me up at night, and it's a real one. So in the early 90s, a woman named Jerry went to a psychotherapist named John Mack because she was having recurring nightmares of UFOs. Then one night, her 2-year-old son started screaming in terror in his room. She ran in to check on him, and he claimed that owl monsters were touching his legs. And when she asked where the owl monsters were now, he claimed that they were in a boat in the sky. So Jerry starts thinking that maybe her family is being visited by aliens. She kind of brushed it off at first, but then one night her daughter has this experience. She was practicing reading for school and she had to time herself in 10-minute intervals and see how far she could read. So she's timing herself for 10 minutes, marking how far she read. Timing herself for 10 minutes, marking. Timing herself for 10 minutes, and then she looks up and an hour has gone by. There's 50 minutes of time she can't account for, which apparently is kind of common in people who have been visited by aliens. I talk more about this story and other alien encounters on my podcast this week. And we hear a story from someone whose grandfather was visited by aliens in the 60s. This is why you have to be careful who you let into your Halloween parties. So this is a photo of who police believed was a guest at a Halloween party in Rochester, New York in the 1940s. The party was being thrown by Jack and Amelia Layton, and they actually noticed that this guest was outside of the party watching the guests through a window. The report claims that Amelia believed the guest was her friend Jan, who tended to go above and beyond for Halloween, creating very scary costumes. So she let this person in believing it was her friend Jan. But then 20 minutes later, Jan shows up, and that guest could not be found anywhere. So Amelia starts running around the party asking everyone if they knew who that guest was, and no one had recognized that person. So she goes into her daughter's room, who was playing while the party was happening. And the police report states that the only thing there left of Amelia's daughter was a bloody shoe. 4 other reports of this guest being at parties that night were called into police, and all of them resulted in missing children's cases. The identity of this person has never been found, and none of the kids have been found either. So some people blame Brittany Murphy's death on her house being haunted, and some people blame her house being haunted on Britney Spears. Let's take a deeper look. This is the house that Britney Spears lived in the early 2000s with Justin Timberlake. Apparently one night after a weekend of partying, she had a Reiki healer come and do a private session. But after he left, Britney Spears thought that he had opened a portal inside of her home while he was there. And now evil spirits were coming out of the portal and trying to push her down the stairs. Terrified, she moved out of the house. And who should move in next but Brittany Murphy, who was reportedly also terrified of the home. In December of 2009, Brittany Murphy passed away inside of the home under very mysterious circumstances. She developed extremely bad pneumonia out of nowhere. And people were quick to blame her husband for potentially poisoning her, except that he passed away 5 months later from the exact same thing. Theories surrounding the death range from toxic mold to hantavirus to spirits that came from the portal that Britney Spears' Reiki healer opened. But we're talking about all sorts of haunted homes on here, so make sure you follow along. Let's talk about the shocking discovery that actually led to the release of Adnan Syed yesterday. As a recap, Adnan was convicted of killing his girlfriend, Hae Min Lee, in 1999, but the evidence was not very convincing. And now it's come out that one of the detectives on the case, Bill Ritz, was actively hiding information on 2 other suspects in the case. One of these suspects actually told someone that they were very upset with Hae Min Lee around the time of the murder, and that they were going to, quote, make her disappear. And detectives knew full well about this, but it never made it to trial. Now it's also come out that one, if not both of these suspects have relevant criminal history, one was accused of SA, and one is in jail for SA. And the evidence that the whole trial against Adnan hinged on was the fact that a person Adnan wasn't even really friends with came forward and said that Adnan did it, and cell phone records, which in 1999 were not really reliable. And let's not forget that the prosecutors really relied on the fact that Adnan was Muslim to accuse him and put him in jail, basically saying that the fact that he was dating in high school brought so much shame on his family that after she broke up with him, he had no choice but to murder her. 30 days to decide if they want to retry the case, but for now, Adnan is a free man. Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? I'm going to be showing you Zillow listings from homes with haunted pasts, and we're gonna see. And some of you may have already guessed it, but this first one is Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home. This is part of a new series, so make sure you're following along. So Jeffrey Dahmer's family lived here from 1968 to the early 80s. And though it's been remodeled, this is the home he was raised in. Most of his crimes took place in his apartment complex when he was an adult, but his first crime actually took place in this house, right in this living room. It was the murder of a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Stephen's remains were actually scattered on the property of his home without his parents ever knowing. The person who owns the home now actually says that the house has no bad vibes, but I just don't know if I buy that. Let me know if there's other homes you want to see. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? So this is a police sketch in one of the most high-profile murder cases happening right now. He's wanted for the 2017 murders of Libby German and Abby Williams, who were killed while out for a walk in Delphi, Indiana. And this is Richard Allen, who was just arrested as a suspect in the case. In another video, I actually showed you this sketch here, which was the first police sketch made in the investigation. And Richard actually looks so dissimilar to that photo that this is actually a picture of him posing next to it and no one noticed. One of the craziest things about this case is right before the girls were murdered, they actually captured this image on one of their phones, and this is who police believe is the murderer. Specific details on the case remain under wraps. I mean, cops won't even release how the girls died, but I can definitely see it. This is why I can't do Ring cameras. So this photo was taken at 3 a.m. on a Ring camera just outside of Spokane, Washington on March 17th, 2017. Which, as if that's not scary enough, the same man was seen photographed on 13 other Ring cameras in the area, all at 3 a.m. At first, police believed it was an attack orchestrated by a group of people, but a closer look made them realize it was the same man. One witness claimed she was awoken at 3 a.m. to what sounded like a baby crying, and that's when she got the alert that something was seen on her Ring camera. She also claimed that since this happened, she's felt like someone's been watching her. This man was never found by police, but a user on Reddit based in Chicago recently posted that she also saw something weird on her Ring camera. She said her and her neighbors all got an alert at 3 in the morning that someone wearing a mask was seen at their door. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you some sketches and then the actual people, and we're going to see if we can see a resemblance. Starting with this guy. So this was the sketch of a suspect in a shooting of a rabbi in Miami. And apparently it was supposed to resemble this guy right here. So this is a sketch of a guy who was holding two women at gunpoint in a robbery. And the crazy thing is it actually led to the arrest of this man. This one is my personal favorite. So this was actually drawn by a witness after they watched this person steal money out of a cash register. And the release of the sketch actually led to the arrest of this person right here. I actually think the eyes look kind of similar. But what do you think? Do you see the resemblances? So Texas schools are starting to send parents DNA kits so that they'll be able to identify their children's bodies in emergencies. And parents are very understandably frustrated with this. For one, it kind of feels like a slap in the face after Uvalde, where nothing much was done to prevent a tragedy like that happening again. And instead of taking steps to prevent that from happening again, they're basically saying, hey, here's an ID kit so you can constantly worry about this happening to your child. Which also, a side note, but fingerprinting every child in Texas doesn't feel very individual freedom of them. Parents are also worried that this is going to bring up triggering conversations for their very young children. Mommy, why are you fingerprinting me? Well, baby, if you go to school and get blown to bits by a military-grade weapon, Mommy won't be able to see your face so good. But this way, if I'm able to recover part of your finger, I'll be able to know it's you. Oh, okay. This idea was actually cooked up in 2021 before the Uvalde tragedy, but the fact that this is a response at all is apocalyptic. You know how they say that kids can see ghosts that adults can't see? I think this video proves it. So look at this little girl. She's talking to someone who's off screen, but watch what happens. It seems like an invisible force tries to take that toy from her, and then watch again. She's still talking to something. And it appears to try to take the box from her again. And she says no. What do you think this is? Some of you guys wanted more context on this case after I made this video, so don't worry, I read about this case so you don't have to. So this is Seth Welsh and Tatiana Fusari, and they're conservative Christian parents from Michigan who in 2018 let their 10-month-old daughter starve to death, and apparently didn't think there would be any consequences for that. In a pretty ridiculous 911 call, Tatiana called 911 at 10 a.m. the morning after she put her daughter down at 3:30 p.m., saying that she was unresponsive and she thought she was dead. But she also tells the 911 operator that she called her lawyer before calling the 911 operator, which is so sus. Also, who puts their baby down at 3:30 p.m. and doesn't check on them until 10 o'clock the next morning? Seth, the dad, also was notorious for believing in survival of the fittest. He didn't think that children should be vaccinated because he thought everyone that wasn't strong enough should die. And he apparently didn't think that his daughter would grow up to be strong enough to work on their farm and therefore wasn't feeding her. Tatiana knew something was wrong with her daughter, but she refused to call a doctor because she didn't trust the medical institution and for religious purposes. Anyways, both of them got life in prison, Seth without parole, and Tatiana has to do at least 25 years. This is why I don't trust clowns. So this is the only photographic evidence that we have of the night clown, or payaso de noche, a clown that terrorized southern Texas in the early 2000s. In 2002, an absurd amount of dogs went missing in Texas. Some communities said that every dog on the block was gone. So one night, this 6-year-old girl, Sarah Martinez, wanders into the woods looking for her lost dog. She was missing for hours, and when they finally found her, she was curled up in a ball crying, claiming the payaso de noche had eaten her dog. Many people in the community chalked it up to her being like a little kid with a wild imagination, but soon other kids in the area started complaining about this. This drawing was submitted by a 2nd grade teacher to evidence. Tons of kids started drawing pictures just like this, claiming that their dogs also had been eaten by payaso de noche. And just like Pennywise, this is not the first time that this clown had been seen. Other sightings happened just outside of Mexico City in the 90s, and more recently in San Diego, where this photo was snapped.